Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we're going to be getting into our second film breakdown from the 2024 NFL Draft. We're going to be talking about Maason Smith, who is the selection for the Jaguars at pick number 48. No trading, no shenanigans, went straight for him. We've seen this team trade a lot, right? And for them to stick put at 48 and to pick Maason Smith, and especially for having heard about this being what was expected well before the pick, because we heard this early on the second night of the draft, I think it tells you a lot about where Jacksonville ranked him. And for me, my original ranking was very, very low. And that's what you're seeing on screen right here. And these are not my final thoughts on it. What we are going to discuss are my final thoughts. I have reevaluated him. I've done more research, and I have some changes in my thoughts towards this pick, which we're going to talk about. But the Jaguars very clearly were very high on Maason Smith. I would argue that they probably had him in their top 32 for this class. And why I say that is because for us to hear this, what was it? I think a couple picks into night 2, or it might have been before pick number 33, we were hearing about Maason Smith being one of the top people for Jacksonville at 48. That's usually, I think that says a lot, because he's got to be towards the top of their board. You have 32 players off at the point that we heard this. That's just the way I see it. And I could see the staff, given the connections to him, viewing Maason Smith as a player who should have been a first-round prospect if things went well in college, which you can argue that. So I think Jacksonville was very predetermined on this pick. We'll talk about that later, because I think that's another topic of discussion to get to. But let's go ahead. Let's jump in. Let's talk about my original thoughts. I just want to give you guys a baseline to know kind of where I came from before this, and then we're going to watch this film. I'm going to give you some new thoughts that I got watching it, and then we'll talk about kind of the final evaluation. What's my grade for it? It is a better grade than what I originally gave it. So, let's go ahead and let's jump into it. So, just talking about physical metrics for Maason Smith. He's a young player. He's 21 years old. Played 3 years in college. Second year, he got hurt. And for me, that was the huge reason why I jumped off that whole bandwagon pretty much as soon as I watched him. And it was because of the way he got hurt. And I will be completely honest with you guys. This was my first year doing the entire scouting process all the way through. And there were a lot of players who did not get due justice. And two of them were picks by Jacksonville. And one of them is Maason Smith. The other one that we'll talk about in the next video is Jerrion Jones from FSU. They were players that I didn't get to watch a lot, that I kind of made up my mind about pretty quickly and didn't really revisit because I didn't see anything when I first watched them. And it was early in the process. And, there's a lot of players that we went throughout all this. So that's my excuse. It's not good enough, right? But I want you guys to understand that with the original evaluation here, and I want to make sure that I'm honest about this. So I had not done a ton of research into what happened with Maason Smith. I figured the fact that he had celebrated and hurt himself said something bad about his character. And listening to him after he got drafted and interviews and all that, I think he's a fine person. I don't have concerns about him off the field at all, or being, stupid at times. I think that's pushing it. And so for me, like, having heard about that in my original evaluation when I was doing my research on him, I think that really screwed up the evaluation on Maason Smith for myself. And because of that reason, you will not see him at 120th on my big board when I give you where he would have ranked, given my the 3 games that I watched after the draft. So Maason Smith, talking about other things here, he is a very lengthy interior defensive tackle. He comes in at 6'5". He fills it out at 306 pounds. He has really long arms and a huge wingspan, which I'm sure Trent Baalke is in love with. But the issue that was kind of shocking was the hand size. He actually came in with the same measurements as Olu Fashanu at 8.5 inches. It's not good stuff, right? Ran well in the 40-yard dash. He's about average. 10-yard split, I think, shows maybe a little bit of concern with explosiveness. But I will say that as I watched him after the draft and some of his film, I felt like even though he put on weight, he became a more explosive player over time. It felt like he knew when the snap was coming, he was able to get off the line quicker, and that really helped him convert speed to power. And so I'm not too concerned about a 10-yard split there because I think the film said something different, and that's what really matters more at the end of the day with these players. Getting into the original scouting report on him, it's pretty brutal, honestly. I gave him positives for massive overall size. I felt like he got his hands up in the air to bat passes. It's a minor thing, right? But I try to throw that in because I think it shows effort. I think it shows good things there. I felt like he did a good job pushing the pocket. That was something I felt the same about rewatching him. And as a pass rusher, you could see some effectiveness. When I went back through film, and you'll see this when we get into the film, Maason Smith had a pass rush arsenal that was somewhat respectable pretty much from the start of his career. And I think that's very impressive given how unrefined college players usually are that first season. And so you can understand why people looked at him after, his freshman year where, maybe he wasn't incredible, but there's clearly tools, and he had 2 more years to work that out, and things just did not go his way. Now, my concerns, there were 3 things that I wrote down. First one was that it felt like he was sluggish. He was not explosive in the 2021 film, and that was mostly what I had gone off of at the time of scouting him. And this really changed over the course of the year. It was something he got better in. I felt like as well that while he did have a little bit of, maybe like a swim move that he would go to, he'd spin a little bit, try out a couple things. A lot of the time, like, he was bull rushing and he really wasn't fighting with his hands enough. He wasn't doing enough with them. And so he just kind of run into someone and then he didn't really know what to do. And it still kind of stands after rewatching it. But I think at the end of the day, it's something I feel mostly the same about, where he did stall out on a lot of plays and he needs to continue to expand that arsenal. He started out really strong, in his freshman year. He had moves, but it didn't really get much better, in his third year where he got to play again, because second year he was out for injury. Pretty brutal season. I think he only played like 8 snaps overall, so did not go his way. And the final thing, which you'll see I still stand by this, if he cannot defend the run, how is he a full-time starter? He, throughout his career, and I'll give you, actually, we'll swap over this really quick so you can see it. I'll give you the numbers from his 2021 season. Look at his run defense grades on PFF, for example. The best he did was slightly above average. And one of those games was against McNeese, which not really a big-time school. And then Auburn. Auburn's respectable, right? But you look throughout his career, he is not graded out well against the run. And this 71.3 is from a season where he had 5 snaps against the run because he got hurt. So throughout his career, he's never been an asset there. So I wonder how that impacts what he's going to be in his career. Like, I have a lot of questions that still stand about, is this guy going to be, someone who's going to defend the run a lot on the field? So without spoiling too much about that, I'll give some final thoughts on that after we watch the film. I do think that's going to be a factor in the evaluation when we talk about what I would like to see Jacksonville do with him and how I think he could become a good pick in the second round. Because I think he can. I want to make that clear. This is not a guy I think is absolutely going to be a bust at this point. Even though you read my summary over there, I sure as heck thought it then. It's a brutal summary. I have to be completely honest about it. So I'm going to turn on some film here. We've got a Florida game in 2021 one of his highest snap counts from that season. Also got a sack in it. And then we have 2 games from 2023 that are noticeably shorter. So I'll be playing these as I kind of talk about some of the things that I learned. So getting into 2021 film, and what's nice about this is that even though we've got SEC content here, it should not take down my video just because we're not live streaming. For some reason, you can't live stream SEC content, but you can absolutely upload it onto your channel as long as it's not monetized, even though the live streams aren't monetized too, but whatever. Okay, jumping into talking about Maason Smith. So my positives when I rewatch this stuff, I talked about this already, but that first year you really could see that there was something to work with. You can go on to PFF and say, well, maybe he only graded out like 55 for the season, and that's slightly below average. But when you watch the film, there is something to Maason Smith. He's got really good size. He's got a pass rush arsenal coming into the college football season, and there's clearly the upside for him to expand on that. He's got a ton of time to do it, and so that's why people were excited about him after that first year, and why they were still excited after the second year, because, well, bad luck, he got hurt. And in those 8 snaps, he looked like the same player, if not better. There was clear upside to people when they watched him, and I absolutely saw that on film. Now, other things about him that you'll see, we talked about getting his hands up to combat passes. I felt like very early on, you can see him have an impact in pass rush situations. Just from the start, he was effective. It was not just, okay, he's got an arsenal, he's just got to learn how to win with it. He was getting pressure very early on in his career. That was some of the very impressive stuff that you saw on film. One of the other impressive things about him too, and this more so goes for maybe the 2023 film, which this will all get kind of mixed together, but I think it's important to give you guys both seasons of content, because, well, 2021 is where a lot of this evaluation has to come from, because that's what you think Maason Smith can work from. That's who you think he is, rather than the guy that 2 years down the road isn't a much better player than he was. In 2023, he was a great tackler, and you look at his stats, he did not miss 1 tackle all season. Watching the film over all 3 of these games, I did not at any point think he was a poor tackler. He is a guy with a ton of length. He's going to get his arms on you, and he is going to take you down. He has the strength to go do that. Now, I did think, interesting enough, that Maason Smith, what he looked like in 2021 was vastly different compared to 2023. And I'm curious to hear what you guys think too, watching him. I think going from 2021 to 2023, he got a lot bigger. You can literally see it like on his stomach, that it sticks out farther than it did in 2021. He was a bigger guy. And you watch where he's lining up on these snaps against Florida in the first game. We actually have 2 Florida games in the film, because one's 2021, the other's 23. He's lining up a lot on the edge against Florida in the first game. He was more of a versatile, play anywhere you want kind of defensive lineman they were doing a ton of different things with. In 2023, he put on weight. He was more of an interior guy. And unfortunately, when I watched him, it felt like his balance was off at times. Like, he didn't really carry the weight well. I think it's why you can see a little bit of a stomach on him. I kind of wonder if that's not his ideal size, especially given that Maason Smith right now has given me no reason to expect a lot from him as a run defender, but he's given me a lot of reason to see, yeah, this guy's got pass rush upside. If you want a really good run defender, you're looking for a bigger guy. If you want someone who's going to be a better pass rusher, you want someone who's playing maybe closer like what Michael Hall was in college. Maybe not 280, right? But a lighter weight can be more explosive and get off the line quicker. What makes this even more fascinating that we talked about as well is that even though he was heavier in 2023, he's more explosive off plays. And I wonder if that's just simply him being able to time snaps better, improving his mental processing. That's absolutely something it could be, because it felt like in 21, that he would wait for people to go and then he would go. And how fast he moved off the line was the same. It was just, when does he start? Does he start right at the snap, or is he taking, almost half a second to get going? So that was really where the question came from. But he was a very different player in both of these seasons. He put on a lot of weight from 21 to 23. I mean, we're talking about 2 years of time, and it felt like his skill set sort of started to change. You didn't see as many pass rush moves at times. Maybe this was more where the bull rush was coming in from, where he just tried to overpower people because he had more of that speed to power element with the explosiveness that he was playing with. So that was a big difference that I saw going from, the 21 season to the 23 season. And you guys, here in a couple minutes, you'll start to see 2023 film pop up. Talking about the other things for Maason Smith, both seasons, it was evident that he has good power. And I think it improved drastically in 23 with his size and with that explosion. And he's someone who, even if he doesn't get a lot of sacks, when he's on the field for pass rushing downs, he's going to be able to push the pocket. He's going to be able to help collapse it from there. And pairing that with Trayvon Walker, with Josh Allen, and then Eric Armstead, assuming those are the other three guys on the field, I think that's a really good pairing, because you got everyone out on the field that is good against the pass, and there's not really a place for the quarterback to run, because you can't go to the edge because that's being taken over by speed, and you can't go inside because you got Armstead and you got Smith there. So I think it's a really nice pairing to bring those guys together, and I think that he's going to be successful in those kinds of situations. Now, I've said a lot of nice things here compared to what I did to start, at least. And so I think it's time maybe to mention some of the concerns that I saw in film a little bit more. I felt like you could see him maybe at times disrupting the run at best. There were points where he could do that. He would at least penetrate the line. But I just never saw him getting many tackles. I didn't see him doing a ton in that aspect. And it wasn't that he was missing. Remember, like we said, he's a good tackler. But he's not in those situations a ton because he's just not getting to the running back that often. It's somewhere that he's going to need a lot of improvement. And right now, if I had to bet whether or not he would figure it out in the NFL, I would probably still bet no. I think he's probably going to be a very good designated pass rusher at his best. I think that's the realistic outcome if they're able to coach him up well, and they have a very good situation for him in Jacksonville that we've talked about before, and I've tried to make it clear because it helps out the grade, quite frankly. Other things, we talked a little bit about his hands. Both seasons, it felt like he just did not keep his hands moving. Sometimes, like maybe when he was on the edge, he was better about it. He knew to use pass rush moves more, but when he's on the interior, he's kind of bull rushing too much. He's not breaking off of tackles, or sorry, breaking off of guards, it would be. He's just kind of stalling. And so I want to see him, even if he has small hands, he is a strong player with long arms. He can have the advantage there. So just keep fighting. You have an arsenal of moves. You can expand it more. I would like to see improvement there, and I absolutely think he can. I think that's something you can overcome, but I think it is a weakness and a deficiency in his game at this point. I mentioned this as well. A lot of these things are getting repeated because we're kind of doing this scouting report twice, quite frankly. That's kind of the point of this, is to update the thoughts on and give you guys a better review of it than I originally did. But he does have a long path to being more than a designated pass rusher. If he is to become a complete player, I think it's going to be years down the road, especially with Jacksonville having just signed Eric Armstead for 3 years. I think Devon Hamilton, he at least has 1 year guaranteed. I believe it's 2, because this is the first year of that veteran second contract. So you've got those guys locked in already, and Jordan Jefferson will probably take some snaps, I'm sure, too. Not more than what Maason Smith gets, but you've got guys in there. You got Tyler Lacey. I don't know if the snaps are going to be there early on in his career, So best case scenario, if things work out with Maason Smith, maybe year 3 is the season. My final concern, and this could go away very easily depending on how they want him to build himself up for this season and beyond, is that he seems uncomfortable playing over 300 pounds. If balance is off, he just doesn't always look like the same guy. I feel like, and to kind of get into the summary now, I'll leave the film up while I talk about this, just so you guys can see a little bit of the 23 film. He, to me, would be best in a situation with Jacksonville where he starts out as a designated pass rusher. I like to see him get around maybe 295, 300 pounds. Just start refining his skill set against the pass. Bring him in slowly on run plays. He can play a little bit against it. But the way I see it, if Maason Smith is to reach his potential, it needs to take time. They need to give him, I think, at least a couple years before he's thrust into a big role with the team. And by big role, I mean being a guy who's on the field, 70% of the time. And they're in a great situation to do this because, well, you don't have an option. You're sitting a player earning double-digit millions a year if you're going to get Maason Smith on the field a ton. But I would like to see Maason Smith go out against the pass rush, probably take Devon Hamilton's place a little bit in that kind of situation. Let him refine his skills, bring him up slowly against the run, and then in the long term, if he works out as a player, I think he's someone who's on the field for those passing downs, and when you're giving him a rest, it's when it's obvious run situations. It might be the first downs. I think you're having him focus more on being maybe the third and medium, third and long guy, coming in on some second downs. Like, that's where I want to see Maason Smith. I want to see him get a little bit lighter, get comfortable again, bring him in slowly and develop him. And where that gets you at the end of the day is to have an impact designated pass rusher who plays a little bit against the run and can at least be average against it. That's what I think is the ceiling for Maason Smith at the end of the day. And would I be excited about that with this pick? I think it would be better than what they've done with these selections. But that is the ceiling. That's important to consider. We're not talking about necessarily what is the most realistic outcome. And I don't want to take my guesses on that. It's always going to fall somewhere in the middle realistically, but that's probably the best I see him being. And is that a good football player? Yes, it is. But at the end of the day, we'll go ahead. I'll show you kind of the notes I'll put together, and we'll talk about my final grade for this. Apologize if you didn't get to watch too much of the Florida game at the end. But I have him up to 70th overall on my big board. Now, obviously, my big board was final on draft day, right? But if I was to have spent my time, reevaluate him, and this is me being as unbiased as I can, because I'll still make it clear I don't love the pick. I have him much higher. I have him exactly 50 spots higher. I think, with that C+ grade, he is an early third round pick. And if they had done it then, I think they would have got the value out of the pick, considering where he is right now, what he can become, and what is the floor, which the floor is probably not a player who sticks around in the NFL that much past the first contract, if at all. That is absolutely an outcome that could take place with Maason Smith. But I did bump up the grade considerably. It goes from a D+ to a C+. Now, getting into not talking about necessarily just the grade on the prospects for my big board, but my grade for the selection that the Jaguars did. What do I think about them taking Maason Smith at 48th overall? That I would give a D+. And here is my reasoning for why I would give that a D+. I would say for that pick, there's multiple things that factor in. The first one is that you had opportunities to trade up in the second round. And the players I'm talking about here, you probably got to throw out A.D. Mitchell, right? Because you drafted a receiver. Gabe Davis is 3 years on his deal, 2 guaranteed. Christian Kirk's here this year. I don't see any way they're cutting him after the season unless he just completely disappoints. And I don't think that happens. So there's not a role for AD Mitchell to fill anytime early in his career. Therefore, it's not really in consideration for me. And you could use that to actually argue against Maason Smith as far as his grade, as far as a pick at 48. But outside of AD Mitchell, the players we are talking about, you've got Johnny Newton, getting into the second round, guys who went before the Jaguars pick. He went at 36th. I think there would have been the opportunity if Jacksonville wanted to move up to go get that guy. And for me, I put Johnny Smith as a blue chip prospect, and he would have been my pick at 23rd overall. I think, if you wanted to take him at 17, that would have been fine. That was probably the best player that fell out of the first round. I think he is a special football player. And the Jaguars had an opportunity, like a lot of other teams that didn't do it as well, to move up the board and to go make that selection and make sure that you're getting a great player out of this and to not take risk. And it's really a lot of what this grade comes down to is the risk. Because you skip on Johnny Newton, right? You got Kool-Aid McKinstry as well. Went at 41. Could have moved up for him too. There were opportunities to go do that. Jacksonville decided not to. And so they sat put and they got their guy. But Kool-Aid McKinstry wasn't their name. The final one to throw out is Jackson Powers Johnson. I understand that Mitch Morse just signed a 2-year deal to play center. You can move on from that after year one if you're willing to have basically paid him, I think, $7 million for a year, which is all right. If JPJ has to play guard, maybe that second season for Brandon Scherf, if he has to be the swing guy on the interior, that's completely fine. But I think JPJ at the next level is going to be a very good interior offensive lineman. And I think, he is more of a power guy, he's the kind of player that could fit a lot of different schemes because he does move well too. He does get on the run. You see him going down the field. It's not like he can't do the athletic things that Jacksonville would ask him to do. So you can argue they shouldn't have, moved up to 34 or 35. Well, here's the thing. You got 3 players on the board that are home run hits there. To get them just anywhere in second round, wait until 2 of them are gone and then make the smaller move to at least get one of them. And they could have done that for Jackson Powers Johnson. He would have been the final player left. They could have moved to 43 and got him. He went at 44. That was an option. And so it was frustrating to see Jacksonville trade back, have all these picks that they haven't done things with, and then not make a move up the board. This is 2 years in a row where Jacksonville has accumulated a plethora of picks and done nothing to package them and to move into position for players that are falling. They simply aren't taking advantage of opportunities where a player who is clearly going to be worth the selection is available. So that's half of this. The other half of why this gets a D, I'll actually correct myself. I am giving this a D, not a D+. I misspoke at first. So that is the official grade, is a D for this pick. The other side of this is that you have to consider the players available at the position, even if you're not trading up, right? Because I could sit here and say, well, they should have got Johnny Newton, and I did, and he would have been a million times better. But you had other options too. You had 2 guys specifically I want to mention. Chris Jenkins Jr. is the first. The second one is Michael Hall Jr. These players went off the board at 49 and 54 respectively. I just cannot see in my mind that Maason Smith being better than both of those players. I don't think that happens. I think maybe if Michael Hall Jr. does not develop at the NFL level or gets thrown off because he put on weight this offseason, maybe Maason Smith is better than him. I don't think Maason Smith is better than Chris Jenkins Jr. The way I look at both of those prospects, if they had picked Chris Jenkins Jr. at 48, you're getting someone who is already a very good run defender. Keep in mind, what did Jacksonville lose this offseason? They lost Fatukasi. Whether or not Fatukasi was great here, which he wasn't, he obviously just had injury problems and it never lived up to the billing of his contract, which is why it wasn't lived out. His whole thing was run defense. You lost that guy. You clearly were not good against the run at the end of the year. And you had a guy staring you in the face at 48 that would immediately be good against the run. And not only that, but has the pass rush upside, that has played, pretty good in the limited situations where he was a pass rusher. That to me was, I don't even know what I'd throw out to measure it, but it was far safer than picking Maason Smith. And I think it's a more impactful player to get right now as well, and in the long term. I would bet right now that Chris Jenkins Jr. will be one of these players that 4 years down the road, when that deal's ending, that he is going to be earning above $20 million a year. I think he will turn into that kind of player. I think Jacksonville could have got a huge asset in being able to get that good of a prospect. Talking about Michael Hall Jr., you've got a player that is also like a very good pass rush specialist, needs to improve against the run, but Michael Hall Jr., still more explosive, still more athletic right now, comes somewhat close in measurables, similar to Chris Jenkins Jr. Good stuff there, not as great as Maason Smith necessarily, but good stuff. And I feel better about projecting Michael Hall Jr. as a run defender because he played at 280. Like, the problem was clearly his size. He's put on size this offseason. I think he's improved. I think he's going to be able to go out on the field and have a shot. I just don't see anything from Maason Smith right now that tells me he's going to be a great run defender. So those are my arguments for both those guys, right? And it doesn't mean that the pick has to be an F, right? It's not. But those are two major things I feel like they whiffed on, because in this draft class, we are not talking about a draft class with a ton of risk, a draft class without like clear good picks. This was one that was very strong. And my sentiment before the draft was that they had to take advantage of this opportunity. They had to be able to go in and take the best players available and to get guys who were not risks. I think a lot of the picks that they have made in the previous years have been very risky, or they have reached down the board for a specific guy that might fit a role. They may have told themselves that guy was ranked higher on their board. In reality, they weren't. I think they are predetermining picks before the draft. That is another massive issue that I have with the Jaguars right now. When we are getting reports before the draft has even begun on day 2, or literally within the first couple picks, of who the Jaguars are expected to take at 48, I have a hard time looking at that like they are actually following their board. That just feels like you're taking certain guys that you generally like there and then throwing them 20 spots higher than they should be to make an argument for why you would go take them. I don't think that's smart, because when you do that, you do not give yourself the opportunity to go hit on a player that shouldn't be there, that's going to have a chip on their shoulder, that's a good prospect, and is going to work out, which is what you got last year in Antonio Johnson. And while I'd love to give them their flowers for that, they skipped him like 4 times after it was clear he was like not even supposed to be close to being on the board at that point. It was like 50 picks that went by. I mean, it was frustrating waiting for them to pick Antonio Johnson. I get frustrated when Jacksonville seems to consistently reach down the board for players, even if that's not how they write it, and they have these guys ranked high. I just have a hard time believing them when they say that. Because you should not know at pick number 48 who you're going to take when it's pick 33. You should not know that. You should have an idea of who you think might fall, but it should be more than one name. So these are issues I have with the pick. Now, do I think Maason Smith can live up to being worth 48? I think he can. And I would not be shocked if he actually does down the road. I think it will be that year 3, probably more likely year 4 if he does. But he has the tools, and he's in a phenomenal situation to succeed here. And I have to give him his credit in that. I do not want this to feel like a personal dig at Maason Smith. I have nothing against him personally. I think he has a lot of upside, and I was very harsh in my original scouting report on him, and I've flipped my mind a bit there. I still don't think this was the best option at 48, and I think it was far from the best option. The upside is there. He can maybe be worth an early second round pick at the end of the day. I think that's where he could fall in if things go perfectly for him. And if you're talking about what is the best situation for him in the NFL, it is with the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's playing alongside his former teammate. It's playing with Brian Thomas Jr. It's going with old coaches they had at LSU. It's working with, this is another thing we haven't talked about, working with Eric Armstead. Another guy who is, I mean, I think he's fine against the run, but he's more so known for a pass rusher. That's where he's really good, and that's where his value is, because he's one of these rare interior defensive linemen that are great at that. And the other thing with Eric Armstead is he is one of those freaky, lengthy interior defensive linemen. Does it sound similar to Maason Smith? It does to me. So I love the pairing. I absolutely love it. I'm going to be very clear about that. It's just, when you're picking, you have to consider what is the most this player is going to have been worth, what is the least they're going to be, what do we expect, and go off of that. And I think the scouting that they did on Maason Smith, I'm convinced they told themselves that, hey, what he was in 2021, that's all we're going to consider. We're not going to look into anything after that, and we're going to treat him as someone who should have broken out in college, and he'll get everything figured out here because we trust ourselves. It's the best team to take that bet. I just wouldn't have done it at 48. So those are my thoughts. I'm very much rambling at this point, but at the end of the day, I give this a D as a pick. I think it's fine. I think they could have done better, but I also don't want to just sit here and give them an A for everything like we did last year and then come out burned from it. I want to be realistic about this, and I want you guys to have, fair expectations of these players, and we're going to root for them. We're going to want the best for them, and I think he's in a phenomenal situation to succeed. But I do want to be real about it, and I don't want to just gloss over things that need to be mentioned, because just because you play for the Jacksonville Jaguars does not mean you are the perfect prospect and the perfect player. And so often, myself and others, we end up kind of overlooking things that we need to discuss. So those are my final thoughts on Maason Smith. Now it's time for him to go hit the field, him to go prove it there, and I think he can. I'm excited to go see it. I love what they've done to the defensive line. And one last nice thing I'll say about the pick, if you're talking about a position to go hit after your first round pick at wide receiver, if you have a prospect available at every position you could take that is just as good of a player as all the other ones, defensive tackle was a phenomenal direction to go. I think it's something that they needed to add depth to, especially considering the injury concerns there. And I love the pairing, I love the position, and I love the player coming to Jacksonville. Doing my research now, a very different opinion, but I just question where they did it and the players that they passed on. So that's what I've got for you guys. We'll have more videos out here soon. It's not going to be like a balls to the wall schedule, I'll just say that. Or it's not going to be as much stuff coming out as we've had in the last couple months. It's the off season. It's, after the draft, things are going to die down a little bit. We're still going to have content here, though. We're going to go through this class. We're going to talk a little bit about the next one, too, because this is an off-season channel. We focus on team building. We focus on all those things, and I've started my scouting already for 2025, so we'll get into all that, and when we get to this NFL season, I hope to have some good stuff ready for you guys. So thanks for watching. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Enjoy yourselves, and finally, go Jags.